pretending that we're have all the answers in 4 minutes to those two questions, but just to get us thinking on this topic we're looking at tonight, why doesn't God stop all the pain? It's about a few years ago now that I was at a memorial service at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in London, and it was an event for those who had lost children, either during childbirth or soon after the child had been born. It was a memorial service for relatives, for family members. I was involved kind of organising the music for it, so I didn't know sort of people there personally, wasn't personally involved in that way. But it was impossible to be at this event and be present there, not sharing in part of the pain and suffering of what these people were going through and had been through. I left the event, and within about 100 metres down the road, it was on a really, really busy street in Chelsea, and people were kind of caught up in the madness of shopping, dining in fancy restaurants, kind of filming the new series of Made in Chelsea, and that kind of, I just felt 100 miles away, millions of miles away from all the pain and suffering of that place, suddenly just to be transported into the busyness of everyday life. And the event itself that I was at, that memorial service, it wasn't religious, but a few poems at it were read out. I'm sure you've been at something like that. And the poems, well, they encouraged the mourners to look for peace in the energy and harmony of nature. The poem spoke of gazing at the clouds to seek meaning and making sense of this life experience. One of the poems spoke about remembering that suffering is just the winter season of life, waiting for the spring to blossom. And I'm sure everyone wanted their winter season to transform to spring. Yet these poems, they just seem so insufficient, so far removed from the raw reality of the pain that people there were experiencing, with no hope of how exactly their winter could turn to the blossom of spring. Really, the whole service left me as a Christian with a question that I wanted to grapple with again as I stood looking at people's tears streaming down their faces that night. And the question was really tonight's question: why doesn't God stop all the pain? Or put it another way, why does God allow the suffering, as people often put it? It's obvious tonight, isn't it, for us all to see the kind of universal nature of the question. In this room, I know that many will have gone through or seen others go through things like cancer and treatment for that, the death of a child, death of a spouse, death of a sibling. Many here will have experienced crushed hopes in life, broken relationships perhaps. And if you're here tonight, there's a few teenagers here, and maybe you've not faced any kind of pain or suffering yet in life. That is unusual, and without sort of being too bleak, live long enough and you will. All of us will in one way or another. So there's a kind of universal nature of the question. There's also the undeniable force of it, isn't there? As we come to this kind of question, you look at the faces of those there at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital that night, or the face of a Ukrainian person as you speak to them about what things are like at home, perhaps at the moment. And whilst there might be one or two maybe here tonight approaching this as a sort of philosophical question to conquer, actually many ask it, like those at the hospital in Chelsea, with a tear in the eye, as a deeply personal question. I just want to say at this point, if you're here tonight and you're currently in a season of intense pain or suffering, I'm so sorry that is the case for you at the moment. And I really hope I don't say anything tonight which seems kind of unconnected or insensitive to life, maybe as it is for you at the moment. Well, our question: why doesn't God stop all the pain? I don't know if you saw a few years ago, Stephen Fry, famous from Harry Potter readings and other things like that. Stephen Fry, the broadcaster, he was asked what he would do. Do you remember this video? He was asked what he would do if he found himself at the pearly gates. The Bible doesn't really talk about, but what would he do if he found himself at the end of his life at the pearly gates? Do you remember his response to that question? This is what he said: how dare you create a world in which there's such misery that's not our fault? It's not right, it's utterly, utterly evil. It's a fairly intense interview, as you can imagine, which I'll refer back to in a moment. See, for Fry, the existence of pain and suffering, it discredits the Christian faith for him. But of course, it's not just Christians who have to address the problem of pain, is it? It's all religions. It's all worldviews. We could talk have time tonight to talk about Eastern religions, but for now, let's just look at the kind of atheistic view of suffering. Not that many live consistently to this, but logically, the atheist has to say that suffering is just part of the natural forces of this world. There's no design, no purpose. Everything's just random, luck of the draw. It's a little bit of an old quote, but I think it's still powerful. A quote from Richard Dawkins, famous atheist. He said this: "In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music." It's got a good way with words. But that is pretty gloomy, isn't it? It's pretty gloomy. How does that sit with you tonight? See, getting rid of God from the picture to make sense of pain and suffering, it doesn't help. The atheist view, which many in the UK would go along with, it offers very little comfort in the midst of pain and suffering. When we look at Christianity, as we will tonight, look, I don't think the Bible has all the neat answers that we might be looking for. But I do believe that Christianity is the only worldview which isn't sort of crushed and knocked out by that undeniable force of this question. It's actually a topic that the Bible doesn't shy away from. Whole chunks, books, are dedicated to it. Well, I'm going to just break it up a little bit to answer this question tonight. First of all, just asking three questions really. Why is there pain and suffering? Why is it there in the first place, first of all? Before thinking about why God doesn't stop it then, we need to ask this question: why is there pain and suffering? Stephen Fry again, in that interview, said this: "Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain?" I'm kind of inclined to agree with him, apart from the fact he's got one thing badly wrong. God didn't create a world like that. So the Bible again and again tells us that the world God originally made was good. Book of Genesis, right at the beginning, you see the list, don't you, of what God has made. As you see it time and time again, we saw God made it and he was pleased with it. It was good. Sun, moon, night, day, dolphins, eagles, aardvarks, whatever he made, good, he said about his creation. And actually into that world, God created human beings to enjoy him, to enjoy each other, to enjoy the world. The world God made in Genesis was paradise. It's quite different than the world that Stephen Fry describes that we live in now. But you see, the Bible says that God gave choice. See, out of love, he created people not as programmed robots, but with the responsibility and freedom to love him back. Yeah, the tragedy is that our first parents, Adam and Eve, they rebelled against God. And so often in history, people have taken that same freedom and turned their own way and done horrendous things. So it wasn't just human relationships which were affected when sin entered into the world, but also it's the world, isn't it, that we live in as well. It's not hard to see the brokenness and that things aren't the way that they're supposed to be in our world. And so if what the Bible says about this all is true, doesn't that make sense of our emotions as we see pain and suffering in this broken world? And we look at it and we say, that's not right. The Bible says, you're absolutely right. It's not right. There is a problem in our world. I haven't done a jigsaw probably since lockdown. I imagine jigsaw sales probably went up on Amazon Prime during that time. But the last jigsaw I think that I did was as a map of London. And it nearly finished me off in lockdown trying to do that. But you know what it's like, you're trying to do a jigsaw, 1,000 piece or whatever it might be, and you're nearly there, and you're right near the end, and you realise there's 5 pieces missing, and you sort of, oh, it's so frustrating, isn't it? So wrong, as you've been working at this for so long, and you look under the table and under the sofa and see when the dog's eaten it, or whatever it might be, to try and find those pieces. Likewise, we instinctively know that suffering is not part of what the world that God had made was supposed to be. It's wrong. Emotionally, we know it to be wrong. If we are just atoms and DNA, as Dawkins says, why do we cry? Why do we mourn by the bed of a family member, perhaps? See, if the atheist viewpoint is carried all the way throughout, that it often isn't. When someone dies, in the atheist position, the pure position, all that can be said is, well, there's no God, it's a closed universe. It happens to everyone at some point, at least there's more resources to go around now. No one says that, of course, do they? But that is the consistent atheist logic. It might be logical, it's not emotional, it's not livable, is it? So why is there pain and suffering? Well, the Bible doesn't say much on kind of our individual situations, maybe as much as we would like. But big picture, sin in our world means that this world is not the way that it should have been. I'm just going to move on to the second point. I wonder if someone maybe wants to open a window as well. I'm getting hot. I don't know if anyone else is sweating as well. The second thing we see then from this passage is this: does God care? We need to ask that, don't we? Does God care about pain and suffering? See, we look around, it often feels like God's quite distant, doesn't it? Uninvolved, uninterested, perhaps in corrupt dictators, crushing poverty, COVID pandemics. But actually the God of the Bible is utterly unique. The claim is that God enters into the broken world that we just talked about as a human being, not in riches, but in poverty. Do you remember what Isaiah says? He was a man of suffering and a familiar with pain. And let me tell you that matters. That really matters. See, as you look through the 4 Gospels, you see that Jesus himself rejected, don't you, by his closest friends, betrayed by them, suffering hunger, living in poverty, mocked, beaten, threatened. Jesus was a man of suffering, acquainted with that and pain. About 9 years ago, I was went to the doctor and was diagnosed with depression about 9 years ago, and sort of been a bit up and down since then. But actually, one thing that really helped me in sort of like darker times, kind of early on, was a conversation I had with a friend who had also suffered and struggling with depression. And she listened, and more than that, she seemed to sort of understand, empathise with something that I was going through. And that made a huge difference to me, actually, through that period and that time. Did it make everything better? No. Did it help? Yeah, it really did. And a number of places we see Jesus himself empathising with suffering people in the Gospels. Do you remember news reaches Jesus of a close friend of his, Lazarus, in John 11, and his friend is dying, and Jesus arrives in the town. And notice on the screen here how Jesus responds. It says this: when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, Jesus was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." Do you see here? This is an amazing passage. Suffering affected Jesus emotionally. He hated death. And he went even further. As many here will know, the culmination of this was his own suffering, chapters later on the cross. Left to die slowly, publicly on a Roman torture device. Hands nailed through, side pierced, crown of thorns on his head. Shouting out the words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" See, it's impossible to miss the fact that Jesus really knows about pain and knows about suffering from the inside. that he's genuinely experienced worse than any of us actually ever will, as he died in that way. See, the God of the Bible is utterly unique, isn't he? He's not some distant Zeus-like deity sitting up there in the clouds, removed from everything. But no, our God has wounds. In Jesus, we find the only person who knows all our heartache and all our pain. At least for me, when I look at the cross, I know that here is a God who loves his world deeply. Much comfort, much consolation in that. Okay, Nathan, you might say, well, how in any way does that help someone, though? Chelsea and Westminster Hospital on that evening. Isn't Jesus' death just more needless suffering? Third thing that we see is this. What will God do about pain and suffering? See, the Bible doesn't say as much as we'd like it to, perhaps, about an explanation for evil or for our individual pain that we go through. The Bible's focus, rather, is more on how he will overcome it, how he will restore all things. And the Bible gives us a taste of that new world, of paradise, which God promises, even better than that original creation. It's easy for our minds, isn't it, to be full of the caricatures of heaven. But actually in the penultimate chapter of the Bible, it talks about a place where God will wipe every tear from our eyes. There'll be no more death, mourning, crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Revelation 21 verse 4. See, Jesus will one day himself make this physical world right. He'll end all pain, all suffering, all death. No funeral hearses, no hospitals, no graveyards, no memorial services, no plasters, no Bonjela, no itchy red eyes from No Mo May, no antidepressants. The list could go on, couldn't it? Don't we long for that kind of happy ending? And Christianity says that there is this hope beyond the grave. Jesus' resurrection, which I'm happy to talk about after, is the thing that makes this promise not just a kind of nice pipe dream, but actually a reality. So our question, why doesn't God stop all the pain now? If he's out there, if he's real, if he does love us, why doesn't he act now, we might ask? Why does that dad die in a family leaving behind a wife and 2 toddlers? Why do the many wars around the world go on? Why do our thoughts torment us day and night? I don't know. I don't claim to know all of God's purposes in suffering and pain. One reason we are given of why he doesn't end it all now does come in the Apostle Peter's second letter. And Peter says in those verses, one of the reasons Christ hasn't returned to sort all of this out yet is because he's patient. See, before he makes this new world, this new creation, he wants to make us new creations. That is, he wants many to turn from their sin, to follow him, to one day be there with him. So much more could be said. So many questions feel unresolved. But I know personally, I don't want to turn to cynicism or atheism or facing pain on my own. I'd rather face it knowing Jesus personally, one who knows what it means to suffer, one who gives the certainty of restoration, of heaven, of a pain-free world forever. So the answer Christianity gives to this question, it enables us to be more honest, more real, and it gives us the resources to cope. It's not just true, but it's also livable. I'm going to pause there. As I said, we're going to watch a little video in a few moments with a friend via Zoom. I'm afraid he lives too far away to get him here tonight. We're going to watch that in a sec. But just before we do that, I want, again, just to go around tables. 2 questions there. Was there anything in the talk you found striking or irritating? You're allowed to be honest. It's okay. Second thing, what questions has it left for you? And that's where we return to a Q&A. So again, just 5 minutes to those questions, and then we'll watch the video in a few moments. Let's just come back together. Okay. People might need to squeeze around to see this. Let me just move the screen back a little bit as well. So this is an interview that I just did last week with a really good friend of mine called Ben, and we're really good friends. I'll be honest with you, we had to do 3 takes to start it because we kept on laughing. So you might notice that it takes about 20 seconds until we get serious. Yeah, absolutely fine. So yeah, it's a friend of mine, Ben. You'll hear his story in it, but hopefully everyone's able to see.
Well, Ben, thanks so much for joining me. I know you're not in the room here tonight, but pre-recorded, and it's great to have you with me and to chat through these things. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, man, it's nice to have this chat. For those, if we've never met, my name's Ben. I live here in Essex with my wife Sarah, and we've got a couple of kids, Eden, who's 2, and Cass, who's 1. And I've known Nathan a very long time.
So you know the sleepless nights at the moment. Brilliant. Well, Ben, we're here I've just given this talk obviously tonight on the sort of topic of pain and suffering and those kind of things. Look, I've known you for a while. Lots in your life is going really well. You're a great musician. I know you're not going to mention that, but you've got a little piece of art behind you with an electric guitar. You're a great musician. Very talented man. You've got a lovely wife and kids as well. Lots is going well, but from a health perspective in your life, things aren't as easy and haven't been for a little while. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you asked me just to speak a bit about this, and I'm glad you just teed up, because just the couple of caveats out of the way is that life really is good in so many ways. There's so much I have to just be grateful for, and so I never want this to come across as a moan. And of course, it's always difficult talking about your own suffering, because you're so aware almost everybody is going through something, physical, emotional, all sorts of different types of suffering, and there's so many people that have it so much worse than I do. So it's, I suppose, with those 2 caveats out of the way, I'm really happy to say a little bit about my story, what's been going on with me. I live with a sort of a long-term chronic pain, I guess is what you'd call it. When I'm in my mid-30s now. It started when I was 18, just aware of something odd going on with my right arm, just felt a bit weird and uncomfortable, did all the usual, sort of went to see physios and kept exercising. Years later, we basically realized, no, something really is a lot more wrong here. They did some tests, and we eventually found that a lot of my nerves had switched off around the right side of my body, and muscles had been wasting and had wasted away completely in some of them. And so I had to sit in a room where a doctor basically said, well, we need to send you for some tests for motor neuron disease. That's a pretty kind of difficult meeting to sit in and be told that, as a young man, to all of a sudden be told, hey, I mean, you might be dying young here. I actually had a really close friend who died of motor neuron disease as well. So of course my mind's just going crazy there. Moving along quite quick with the story though, eventually we rule out motor neuron disease. So it's not motor neuron disease. And I say, that's great news. Cool. So what is it? And they say, we have no idea. Absolutely no idea what it is, no idea what it'll do, but your muscles are wasting. It might stop, it might keep going. We just don't know. And I lived with that, I guess, through most of my 20s, with muscles disappearing away. By my mostly again, right side of my body, my back. By my mid-20s, I couldn't really lift my right arm much at all anymore. I'm right-handed, so all sort of sport and music, high fives, dance moves started going out the window, and just living with a lot of pain, like a lot of discomfort. I had to start using my left hand for, all sort of daily things like eating and brushing my teeth, and then couldn't quite dress myself the same way. And the saddest moment was being in a meeting with a doctor where he said to me, if I wanted to sort of get married, have kids, that I should think about doing that young, because I wouldn't be able to pick my kids up very soon. I don't really know why he said that. That just kind of was a bit of a tearjerk moment for me. He said that and it just really hit me as like, oh man, like I don't know what the future is going to happen here. Again, moving the story on a wee bit, I had a major surgery on my back to move a load of muscles around, do a load of drilling. and absolutely amazing. Like the surgeons did an unbelievable job. They brought back a huge amount of movement to my right arm that had gone. And I can pick my kids up just about. I mean, I usually need like a long sleep afterwards. Like, but I mean, did an amazing job with this surgery. But they dragged the little neck muscle right along that kind of is the last muscle remaining to kind of help me move my right arm. And so I'm just in a lot of daily pain, discomfort with that. I do try and play sport occasionally, but I slipped like 4 discs last year, try to do really basic stuff. And I'm told I've got the arthritis of a 90-year-old already. So I suppose where I am is I live with, because of all of these muscles that have gone, I live with a lot of just pain and discomfort, tightness, put my back out a lot. And I have a pretty unknown future of what is going to happen with this still. So that's kind of where we are.
What have they said about future, like when you've chatted to doctors and surgeons and those kind of things?
We're currently pretty hopeful that the wasting may have stopped. So it doesn't look like it's going to do us, like we said, it's not a full motor neuron disease thing where it just keeps going. But as to what this sort of looks like for my long-term health of my back, my arm, I mean, they may have to do another surgery to sort of put metal work in and lock my arm in place to reduce some of that movement. We're hoping it doesn't start causing more damage around my throat and ear, because it's all just tied in around here. But we really just don't know. We don't know. I'm if you want to be really optimistic, you can be hopeful and say it's going to be fine. But we also just don't know.
Thanks, Ben. And you shared with me a bit as well about times where you have slipped the disc and you're not able to help kind of get the kids out of the car seats and things like that, or get them into the high chair. And actually, in terms of daily pain, isn't it, as well with this, that it's not just a kind of every now and then, but almost every day you're aware of this, aren't you? Is that right?
Yeah, all day, every day, just sitting crunching my neck away, just thinking how uncomfortable it is. And like I say, it could be a lot worse, but it's a pain and discomfort that is always there. It doesn't go away.
Yeah. No, thanks so much for sharing that. You're also a Christian, and I think you became a Christian in your sort of teenage years. So I guess getting on for 20 years or something like that as a Christian, if it's right to ask, how's kind of faith shaped the way you've responded to the daily pain and these big things going on? And I guess as well with that, like, what difference does being a Christian make in those moments day to day? What kind of things do you hold on to in those moments where things are tough?
Yeah. I came to know Jesus when I was 18. I guess at first you're just so excited by this good news. You just think life is going to be awesome now. Life is going to be like heaven. And whilst faith is totally game changing, quickly realize life is still a wrestle. And I still really, to this day, just really struggle with the question, why is there suffering in the world? Like, why does God allow all this suffering? And I think that's just one of the most common questions human beings ask and wrestle with, especially with the idea of God, and especially when it's your own suffering. Those questions don't really seem to go a ton. And faith gives really compelling answers, but it's still hard. And I don't think that I respond well all the time. I definitely don't respond well all the time. The truth is that it's a fight for joy. I think I'm naturally quite a joyful, happy temperament and person. I'm seeing that decline because it just increasingly day by day, it's a fight to just be happy, and it's a fight to love others, because often you're talking to someone else and you're just thinking about how much pain you're in and how much you want to sit down, and you sort of feel like you're losing yourself a bit. You're losing who you want to be and who you think you are, and it's just so easy to get bitter. And I do feel bitter sometimes, and on my worst days I feel angry. Just saying, why? What's the point of all this? Like, what is doing nothing but bad? And the big thing for me probably is it's really easy to feel anxious about the future. Like, I think I'm in my mid-30s now, can just about get through the day, and I'm just desperate to get my head down on a pillow. And if I'd lift a shopping bag, I slip a disc. Like, what am I going to look like when I'm 60? Like, I just like you can if you let your mind focus on things like that, like you can go into a dark place pretty quick. And I think I've glimpsed some of those dark places a few times, and it's just easy to be consumed by those things. And someday I am more consumed by them than others. But fundamentally, the Christian faith is game changing in those things. Um, both logically are things you can tell your head, but eventually those things working into your heart to a point where you really feel them. I mean, for a start, you're taken out of a framework where life is chaos, and meaningless, and hey, there's suffering, deal with it. All you really have is the power of positive thinking. You're taken out of that framework into a Christian framework where there's a God who has a plan through pain, and actually a God who stepped into the world of pain and knows what pain is, personally. And I that immediately you're in a different field, you're in a different game. And of course, the huge hope of being a Christian is that the Christian faith is founded on historic fact, like the resurrection of Christ. It's a resurrection religion, and we have a hope of a new world that is coming, and it's near, and it's round the corner, where all tears are wiped away. God makes everything new. We get new bodies. 1 Corinthians 15 talks about our bodies now being like a seed that are going to be resurrected, and given these new bodies. And that's founded in a fact, the resurrection of Christ. And so for me to have this future hope, that is, and it's something that is too good for us to imagine. You can never kind of grasp that and go, I understand that. It's just always something that's just too good to imagine. And that by itself would be enough, I think, to sustain through any suffering. But actually, I'm realizing more and more Christianity isn't just a waiting room religion. It's not. Do you know what I mean by that? It's not just suffering now, wait, and it'll be great in the future. It is that to some extent, but faith in Christ really does change you today as well. Like it begins today. And the verse that's been the most helpful to me through this is the 2 Corinthians 4. It talks about, therefore we don't lose heart. Though outwardly we're wasting away, inwardly we're being renewed day by day. These light momentary troubles are preparing or achieving for us a weight of glory that's beyond all that comprehend. It outweighs everything. I forget the exact verse. Again, it has that idea that all the suffering in this life isn't even going to compare to what's to come. This suffering now is light and momentary. I try and tell myself that most days. It doesn't feel like that, but in the context of eternity, it will be. But it adds that the suffering now is actually, it is doing something. It's achieving something now. It's renewing me today, and I have on good days I do see that. It a few things it does, like it humbles me a lot having suffering in my life. Quite a proud young man, and God is changing me slowly on that. And having suffering in my life, it does humble me. It makes me more dependent on him. It makes me pray. I don't think I'd pray otherwise. Knowing myself, it makes me pray. It gives me a deeper communion with God. It helps me recognize that we're in a fallen world, which helps me fall out of love with this world a bit more and long for the next. It does do that, like, for sure. Like there are some days where it's like, this world sucks, this life, same to the next one. It makes me hungry for heaven, and but the thing it's been doing recently, I'm not naturally this way inclined. It's making me more grateful for the good things I do have in my life, of which there are still loads. And I think it's so easy to just take everything for granted. I'm definitely the kind of person that takes everything for granted, and having a whole chunk of life perhaps taken away and made difficult, frustrated, it does make me just so grateful for all the things that I do have. And we have here in the Western world and the modern world, and there's tons every day to just give thanks for. And this is in no particular order, but the other big one is just empathy with other sufferers. Like when you have nothing going wrong in your life, it's difficult to really get alongside other people and really care, like really know. And of course, you can never know what everyone's going through, but to have your own deeper suffering helps you empathize with others. It teaches you to love others. So yeah, there's just a few things that I think the ways it is changing me. And there's always that question: if God came to me and said, "Do you want me to remove your suffering?" I'm increasingly in a place where I would say, "Your will be done." What I mean by that is, don't take it away if it's doing me good. That more spiritual good that is more important than the pain. You just got to learn to trust God. Pain has a purpose, and He's good, and He knows. And so yeah, that's where I am, and that's how faith changes things for me.
Wow. Thanks so much, Ben, for sharing that, for your honesty, for your reflections from your own life, but also what the Bible has to speak into some of these things, and giving us lots of food for thought. Really appreciate. I know you're a few hundred miles away down in Essex, but thanks so
Yeah,
much for joining us for this time.
it's a pleasure, man. Have a good night. See you guys.
Well, Ben.
Okay. Good. No, it's not quite the same having someone on the screen as in the room, but not only is he my coolest friend, he's definitely too cool to be my friend, but he's deep. He's thought deeply about the Christian faith, about his own suffering, and now he's just confirmed he is downplaying at the beginning there how bad things are day to day for him. I've been away with him before where he's just had to lie down in the middle of a conversation, or just kind of, as he said, he hinted it, but sort of every moment of every day, he feels this. I hope that was helpful, just to kind of apply, I guess, some of these things that we've been listening. We've got 10 minutes now, just before we close, for sort of Q&A. Unfortunately, I can't call Ben in to answer all the questions, but I'm here to try. Anything just from round your tables, reflections, questions on this big topic?
How do you think we guard against bitterness in the face of suffering? Because it kind of, I mean, I know you can sometimes be a bit of a mixed picture, but it can either kind of grow you in your faith, or can lead into bitterness.
Yeah. So just to repeat that question, if people don't hear it, how can we kind of guard against bitterness when particular sufferings come in our life? I think probably two things. One from Ben and one from me, probably. I mean, he was quite helpful practically, wasn't it? That he feels that temptation to just kind of, I guess, curve in on himself. And when there is so much going on, I'm sure lots of us find this, when there's so much going on in our own lives, it's really hard to almost have a conversation with someone else, to ask them how they're doing or what's going on in their lives, just because we're consumed with it. So I think one of the things Ben mentioned there, wasn't it, was sort of being thankful to God and being deliberate. That often doesn't come naturally, but actually taking moments of time in the day, perhaps with gratitude of what you do have, or the blessings in life, that despite particular suffering, that person gave me a phone call and prayed with me, or I've got a neighbour that knocked on my door, or small. It might still feel like small things, but I guess in the midst of all that is going on, taking the time for gratitude and acknowledging God is at work through this. So the other thing would be, we can be honest to God. So, I mean, many of I haven't heard your sermon, Kim, yet from this morning, but the book of Psalms, I mean, what a resource for suffering people, suffering believers. And they're very honest, aren't they? They don't sort of, as I said, have the neat answers or tie things up. But how long, my Lord? I mean, how many times does that come up in the book of Psalms? To cry to God, to ask him, to bring these things before him, rather than sort of, I'm going to deal with this all on my own. Say to God, look, God, I'm feeling bitter. It's 10:20, about to walk into church. Help me. I'm crying out to you. I want to not be bitter about this, but speak to others and minister to others perhaps through it. So those are two potential things, but I'm sure there's more answers as well.
Good.
Yeah. Are there any other questions or reflections?
Can I comment on that one? Not particularly in the time when I was in my worst, but now, and Ben has alluded to it, suffering has a purpose in God's plan. And getting your head wrapped around that is very difficult at times, and innately we don't think that way. But that is really quite a relief.
Yep.
That it's not random, and it's not pointless, and it's not negative. It can have very positive outcomes. And Ben alluded to it, that suffering changes character, develops faith, gives you skills that you wouldn't have if you hadn't been through it. And clinging to the verse, God's plan is good and works for good of those who love him. And just trusting that and clinging to it no matter what, when you think it's not. Just clinging to that and saying, I'm trusting that promise even when it doesn't feel like it. And I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't cling to that almost hourly.
Yeah, thank you. And I think sometimes that's called a sort of redemptive nature of suffering. And I think that doesn't, what you said is right, it doesn't mean that we always know that purpose. No. I'm not saying you were saying that, but actually we can't always see. I mean, it's why some of the big, often the Bible teaches us that through not always sort of pithy sentence or verse, but sometimes through stories. So look at the life of Joseph, Genesis, 37 to 50. Number of chapters into the teens of chapters to teach us that story over time in the life of Joseph or the life of Job. Why isn't Job 3 chapters long? Well, I guess it's taking us on a journey, showing us the contours of God working through those things in Job's life. We don't always know. With those stories, we have the blessing of, we see the whole picture and we can look at the whole story. Or I was reading Ruth in my time in the Bible this morning. You can see the whole story of what's going on there. We can't always see that in our lives, that is hard. Those of you, Tim Keller, I don't know if some of you know that name, and he died, was it 1 or 2 weeks ago? And he actually, in his sort of notable Christian pastor and author, and he's battled with cancer for the last few years of his life, and he's spoken quite extensively about just how he faced suffering in those final weeks and months and years. So maybe I'll try and send a link around in the weekly email or something, just to listen to him reflecting and speaking kind of in the midst of in the belly of suffering, if you like, and all that's going on. Time for one or two more, perhaps. Elizabeth, yeah.
I think that his point about empathy was a good one, because I think that it is a humbling thing to suffer, and when you are suffering physically or emotionally, it makes you realise what other people are going through, and it does help you to be helpful to other people in the future, you know.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, they can, and I guess you get that, don't you, in something like 2 Corinthians 1, of actually the sorrow and the struggles that we've been going through help us show compassion to others who are suffering. So my mum, for example, lost a baby, so it was between my sister and me, so 2 years before I was born. You know, she lost a baby that came earlier, very prematurely, 20 something weeks, and she gave birth to that baby, lived for 20 minutes. And why? I don't think that's resolved. I don't think she's got over it in any way, not that she should. But actually, you know, she has been able to since help loads and loads of other Christian and non-Christian mums who have had a similar experience, talk to them about the gospel, what hope she held on to through that time. Would she have rather not gone through that? Yeah, of course. But actually, yeah, sort of, I guess, an example of that point. Debs?
When you're living with the trauma and consequence of other people's sin day after day, how do you keep forgiving?
With 1 minute to go on the clock, I don't think I'll give that a sufficient answer. I think that's maybe one for another night, because I think I don't want to sort of give glib answers. other than that we are forgiven people as Christians, aren't we? And there is the call, the call to forgive others. And sometimes, I guess that happens sometimes in a conscious moment of saying, Lord, I don't know how or why almost, but I choose to forgive. There was a kind of one-off moment, but then there was also a lifelong of needing to remember that, working that through, ups and downs along the way. That's not straightforward, but at all. But I guess again the resources are there with looking to Jesus, of someone who's been through kind of everything in terms of trials and suffering from the inside, of asking help from him along the way in the midst of pain. That'll be a very, very initial starter, but I think that's maybe one for an evening like this to think through at more length. Actually would be good as well. Let me just call it there, just 7 o'clock. Why don't I just pray as well as we finish. When we think of that verse that Ben referenced, that is so precious to him and was precious to many of us, we do not lose heart.
Yes.
Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. Or perhaps some of us know that wasting away. Ben knows that in a very physical, bodily way. Others of us know that maybe just emotionally, we're worn out, struggling, or just even to get out of bed in the morning, get through the day, forgiving others, forgetting memories. We feel that pain. But we do remember as well that the Bible somehow is able to say that all we go through now is light and momentary when it is compared to eternal glory that outweighs them all.
Yes.
We don't understand that in full. Perhaps we struggle to understand that, but we do hope for that day, Lord, where there will be no pain and suffering and mourning and tears. We long for that day. Thank you that is guaranteed because of the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ, that guarantees our resurrection too. So Lord, I pray that as a church we would be good at walking alongside each other through suffering and pain. Help us not to give glib, quick answers, but to care and walk with people for the distance, knowing that there is a future hope. And we pray this in Jesus' name.
Yes.
Amen. Thanks for coming. If people want to chat more or pray with others, do that as well. Thank you.